We're going to walk through the story this morning. It's from Exodus 16. We're talking about rest and Sabbath. This idea that we are to set aside some time in order to have rest, something that God wants us to do. So first shows up in Exodus 16. And here is what God says. Now God is telling Israel, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Understand that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he will give you 2 days' worth of bread. Each of you stay where you are. No one is to leave his place on the seventh day. So, the people rested on the seventh day. A few weeks later, this shows up in God's top 10. And here's what God has to say again. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock or resident alien who is within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Honor your father and your mother so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And then later again, Moses has to remind the people. He brings it up again because they have short memories. And again, here is what he says about the Sabbath. And this time, not just simply talking about bread, it's about anything. For 6 days, work is to be done. But on the seventh day, you are to have a holy day, a Sabbath of complete rest to the Lord. And anyone who does work on it must be executed. Do not light a fire in any of your homes on the Sabbath day. And the implication there is because it requires work. All right, Jesus Smiles is our series that we are looking at throughout these few weeks as we walk through God's expectations of us. You know, in the late 1800s, when it comes to work, in the late 1800s, which is about, 140, 150 years ago or so, 160? The work week was 7 days. Work week was 7 days, and often these work days were 12 to 14-hour days. And so it didn't always look like what we have today. You know, with the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of work that was being done. People moved from the farms to the factories, and they started, again, pushing this great big economic machine. You know, between the advent of electricity, the advent of cars, the airplane, the telephone, all this is happening around the turn of the century. And the workers were getting really tired. In the late 1800s, they went on strike, and they were able to get the workday down to 8-hour days. But they were still working 7 days a week, 56 hours a week. Until there were a couple of changes that happened along the way. In 1908, there was a group of Jewish settlement in New England that went to the cotton mill and said, "Hey, would you give us the Sabbath day off?" And the people that owned the cotton mill said, "Okay, sure." But then the Christian folk at the same cotton mill, they would take time out of their days on Sunday, go to church, and then go back to work. And the cotton mill said, "You know what? We're going to give you 2 days off. One for religious purposes and one kind of a break day." And that was really the beginning of the 5-day work week. In 1926, Henry Ford figured out that he could get more productivity out of his workers if he gave them a 5-day work week at 8 hours a day. And so since 1926, just about everybody works a 40-hour work week, 8 hours a day, and that's where we get our work week. What's fascinating about all this is that Henry Ford was doing it for the bottom line. Make no mistake, he figured out that there were more cars being built, more cars being sold, if he gave people time off, 2 days of rest, or 2 days away from work, which increased the amount of play that the American worker would have during the week. So Ford was interested in the bottom line, but what he's getting at, or what he's picking up on, is something that has been part of who we are as human beings from the very beginning of creation, something God has wired into us, and that's rest. The need for rest. The need for rest. In our Bible talk today, we're looking at this particular subject because it appears in God's top 10, this idea of rest. So as we we're working through Luther's small catechism, we're asking the question, what does God expect? We ask that question because we're asking the question, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a participant here at the table? And what does God want from us? And that shows up in God's top 10. We're looking at the third of God's top 10 commands that he gave to Moses and Israel as they have come out of Egypt. They're now at Mount Sinai. Here is what he said. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. You're to labor 6 days and do all your work, but on the seventh day, that's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work. So remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Now, as soon as we say this, we recognize that doesn't really look a whole lot like life right now. There are all sorts of questions that come with this particular command that arise from it. And this commandment has had its share of controversy over the past 4,000 years. And we're not going to get into all the various views on how this particular commandment has been kept, should be kept, or whatever, but we are going to look at what it means for us right now. What does it mean for us here at the table? And again, as we've noted, this isn't the first time when God delivers the 10 Commandments or gives Moses his top 10 expectations at the top of Mount Sinai. When he gives Moses this, he's writing on these tablets of stone for Moses. This isn't the first time that Israel has heard this particular command. Again, we read about it. 2 months after leaving Egypt, they are wandering through the wilderness. They've come out of the Red Sea. God saves them as a people from Egypt. They come out of the Red Sea. They're moving toward the Promised Land. And 2 weeks into this journey, the people are already complaining. Now, they're complaining a lot. They've been complaining the whole way. In fact, they were complaining before they left Egypt. At one point, they weren't happy with Moses. You know, who made you the guy that's supposed to go to Pharaoh? So these Israelites, they're a complaining people. Basically, that's us. They're a mirror of who we are. But they're complaining. 2 weeks into this, God has saved them. He blew apart the Red Sea, creating a wall of water so that they could walk through on dry ground, saves them from the Egyptian army. And 2 weeks later, 2 months later, they're complaining. Now they're hungry. They're complaining about the lack of food. Here's what happens. The entire Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt when we sat by pots of meal and ate all the bread we wanted. Instead, you brought us into this wilderness to make this whole assembly die of hunger." Now, that's quite an accusation. That's quite an accusation. You brought us here to die. Again, it's hard to believe that they're bringing this up. They're only 2 months removed from walking through the Red Sea on dry ground, with the water then collapsing behind them over the Egyptian army. God single-handedly saves them. They've seen the whole thing at its worst. You brought us into this wilderness to die. So God shows up. He gives them food to eat. The Lord said to Moses, this is a fascinating sentence right here. I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. You're hungry? I'm going to rain bread. I've heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread until you are full. By the way, there's that evening-morning rhythm. God's day starts in the evening. We saw that in the creation account that we read. The evening and the morning were the first day. It's different from the way we think about our day. At twilight you eat meat, in the morning you eat bread until you are full. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. So, at evening, quail came, covered the camp. In the morning, there was a layer of dew all around the camp. When the layer of dew evaporated, there were fine flakes on the desert surface, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they asked one another, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. Moses told them, it is bread the Lord has given you to eat. And that last sentence is key, critical. Lord has given you. Israel's hungry. Israel's complaining. The Lord gives them in his grace. He gives them the food they need. They get quail in the evening, and they get manna, is what that is. Manna in the morning. Meat first, and then the carbs, right? Now we know almost nothing about manna, except it had a lot of the same qualities. You could do the same things that you could do with bread. It had the same types of qualities. In fact, God here and Moses are calling it bread. So what we're supposed to see here, especially in the inclusion of bread here, because anytime bread shows up in the scriptures, it's telling us that God is providing. This is God's provision. This is God's gracious provision. You think he led them through the wilderness just to die of hunger? No. Now, he's providing for them all along the way. He provides them with the food that they need. Now, not only does God give them quail and give them manna, not only is he giving them, he's given them water already. Not only is he giving them all these things, he's also providing a stipulation that goes along with it, within his provision. There is an expectation that reinforces this idea that they are supposed to be dependent on God. They have 6 days to forget that. If they forget during the 6 days that God is the one providing, that he is going to reinforce this idea with this expectation. They're to be completely reliant on him. Here's what it says. On the 6th day, this is God talking to Moses, when they prepare what they bring in, it's going to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. For 6 days you will gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So, God gives them this stipulation. He also says, understand the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6th day, he's going to give you 2 days' worth of bread. Each of you stay where you are. No one's to leave his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. So the people are hungry. God provides, and it has the stipulation that goes along with it. That 6th day, which would have been Friday for them, the 6th day, they're going to get twice as much food. On the 7th day, They're to rest. They're to fix all the food, by the way, on the sixth day. And they're to rest. That's the story. Now, sprinkled in it, we haven't read this. They're having a hard time going along with the stipulation. At one point, some people go, we haven't read it, but they go out on that seventh day looking for their manna, and it's not there. There's no quail, no manna. And like, what happened? Moses said, God's not sending it on the seventh day. You're supposed to be resting. So Israel, even in the midst of God's provision and all this, still having a hard time going along with it. But the upshot of all of this is they're to do their work on 6 days, and on that seventh day they are to rest. And in that rest then be dependent completely on God for their provision, understanding that it is God who is not only providing them food, but is providing them safety, providing them health. He has provided everything for them along the way. And so they are to rest 1 day a week. The 1 day a week is being content with what God has provided. No work is necessary. You get that too? No work is even necessary on the seventh day because he's provided enough for the seventh day on the sixth day. God is doing everything for them so that they can rest, so that they can be content in his provision for them. You see, the Sabbath says God is enough. God is enough. His provision is enough. We are content with that. God is enough. You see, this is what God had done at creation. We heard it earlier. And that's why it makes it into the top 10. Israel is going to have a Sabbath because this is what God did in creating the world. God creates the world in 6 days, and on that seventh day, God rests from the work he had done. And this rest that we see in creation, and the rest that Israel is supposed to be having on their seventh day, this isn't simply to recharge the batteries. Now, that's happening here. Our bodies need to be recharged. But it's not simply about recharging the batteries, and this is something Henry Ford couldn't see. That Sabbath is also for God to enjoy his creation, to commune with his creatures. We're told there in Genesis that God spent his Sabbath communing and conversing and having fellowship with Adam and Eve and his creation. He walked with them in the cool of the garden on the Sabbath. See, God was spending his Sabbath with his people. He was resting with his people as they are content with everything that he has done for them. The interesting thing, though, is man sinned. Man rebelled. And we keep going back to that story. That man doesn't like it this way. He doesn't want God. He wants to be God. And so man wants it all. And man, when he falls, God says, I'm going to fix the sin problem. What's the interesting thing about this whole Sabbath discussion there in the creation account is that when man falls, that particular Sabbath comes to an end. God goes back to work. God had been resting with his creatures, and now that rest is over. Man sins, man rebels, and God has this conversation with them. Things are going to get hard for you. You're going to have to work, and in that work, you're going to be sweating. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. And God goes to work as well. Only this time he's working on man's redemption. That's the story of the Old Testament in our Bibles. God going back to work in order to save his people from their sins. And you see, that's what God is doing with Israel and the manna in the wilderness. And provided God is working for them. He's been working this whole time. He was working in Egypt with Pharaoh, working out their salvation from Egypt. Working on Pharaoh's heart, working on the hearts of the Egyptians, working on the hearts of his own people. He works at the Red Sea. He protects his people from the Egyptian army. He is now working to give them bread He gives them manna and quail. He's working. And he works, and he works, and he works. And as God works, he wants his creatures to rest one day. You know why? Because among all the other things that are happening in the Sabbath and happening in the work week, whether it's rest for our bodies, whether it's listening to a word from the Creator, Israel is to rest because they're anticipating that at some point, sometime in the future, when God makes good on all of his promises, God himself is going to rest from his work because salvation has been complete. That's what he's doing when he says you need to spend a day resting, anticipating a day when God no longer has to work for our salvation. And so this is the rhythm of Sabbath. In fact, this entire chapter, chapter 16 in Exodus 16, gives us a rhythm for rest that is not only true for Israel, but it's also true for us. At the very beginning of the chapter, they are hungry and they are complaining. And throughout the rest of the story, then God is working to provide for them. And so they eat, and it says they are satisfied and they have rest. You see, that is the rhythm of Sabbath. Hungry people eating from God's hand, being content, and then satisfied and rest. That's what it means to rest. That's what it means to be content. Hungry people who are fed by God, now resting because of what he has done. Now, God eventually did rest. That's how the story, we follow the story in the Old Testament. 1,500 years later, his son is hanging on a cross, dying for his people's sins. He is bringing about the completion of everything that he and the Father and the Spirit have been working for hundreds and thousands of years since the fall. And he hangs on that cross, and at the end of it all, you know what he says? He says, "It is finished." And when he says it is finished, he ushers in a rest. Rest for God, rest for his people, because it's done. It's taken care of. The redemption that he promised way back to Adam and Eve, now complete. He's been working this whole time. And now in one final moment, hanging on a cross, says, "It is finished." It's complete. Salvation for you and for me. The debt has been paid. So as God then rests, he invites sinners to rest in what he has done for them. Because Jesus has finished that work, he is called the Lord of the Sabbath. We read that moments ago. He is the one who now provides the rest. Here is what, again, here are the words that he says. "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." His rest is easy, and it's to be found in Jesus himself, who is our rest. This is Christ's promise to be our rest for us. Like Adam and Eve, our rest is in our Creator, who has given us everything we need to be right with him. That is our promise, and it has come to its fruition in Jesus. So, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for us as we think about Sabbath and expectations and Jesus being our rest and having done the rest for us? When I was growing up, this was interpreted to mean that Man, every time that church door is open, you make sure that you're in church. And we live that way. And this particular commandment was cited. And that's not really the rhythm of the New Testament as it relates to this particular command. Now, it's close. It's close. Coming to the gathering here on Sunday, it's not about attendance. It's not about checking that box off. And I know we can also talk about, because this does happen, we come and we recharge our batteries, right? That is part of the rest that we experience. But ultimately, that's not all. What's providing us rest when we come is Christ himself, and he does it in his word. He does it in his table. This is where Christ is our rest and provides us rest for us. So, when we gather, yes, we've chosen to gather on Sundays, and it is good for us to be here. But why is it that we come here and gather? What is it that we do? Is it simply to recharge our batteries, or is it, among other things, which recharging our batteries is it feeding from Jesus? Feeding from him himself. Allowing Jesus to give us his life. Allowing him to give us his forgiveness. Allowing him to give us his rest. All of which he provides when we gather. In the listening to his word and the eating of a meal. Our rest is here. It is. It's in this gathering that we get fed. We gather to feed from Jesus himself. This was his message to the 5,000 that day when they all came looking for him. Actually, the next day, after he feeds the 5,000 miraculously out of 5 loaves and 2 fishes, they're all looking for more. And he says, you missed the point. The point of the whole thing was, I gave you bread so that you would understand that I am your bread. And that you're to eat from me. The one who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. I'm your life. So that's why we gather here. So the Sunday's not. Sunday itself, the 24-hour period, that's not the Christian version of the Sabbath. By the way, the Sabbath for Israel was on Saturday. Sunday is not that for us. The New Testament is clear that those types of observances, or thinking about them that way, are no longer valid. That was for Israel. But what we are supposed to see is Jesus as our Sabbath. And in seeing Jesus as our Sabbath, and seeing Jesus as the one who provides us rest, we gather on Sundays to feed from him and to find our rest here. Our manna is here. And this story in Exodus 16, again, is our rhythm. When we come through those doors on Sunday, we come through as hungry people. Every week, that's us. We come from amidst of a noisy world. A world that creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. And so we come through those doors, hungry and thirsty, looking to get fed. And then as God provides the meal for us, as God feeds us here in this gathering, he gives us of himself, and he's giving us his life. He's giving us his forgiveness. He's giving us his peace. He's giving us his joy. He's giving us his rest. We come through as hungry. We leave as people who are rested, who have found rest. Do you know what L-tryptophan is? If I say that, some of you know what L-tryptophan is. We talk about this once a year, right? That's the chemical that's found in turkey, right? And as the story goes, that's the stuff in the turkey meat that makes us go night-night on Thursday afternoon, usually during the third quarter of the football game. We all lay down for a nice snooze. The funny thing is, the scientists tell us that that's not really accurate. It's kind of an urban legend. Now, it does have tryptophan in it. But scientists say, all sorts of meats. Turkey's not the only one. You can eat any kind of meat on that Thursday. We're going to get tryptophan. They also say the amount of that particular chemical in turkey is not all that great, not enough to put you into a deep snooze. So what is it? Well, yeah, there's something else going on. You ever heard of postprandial somnolence? That's another fancy scientific term. Postprandial somnolence. The common name for that is food coma. And that is a reality. That's not urban legend. What the scientists are saying is it's the carbs with the meat. It's all of it. It's all of it. This is what happens to our bodies when we consume a lot of food in a short period of time. So it is the turkey, but it's also the gravy, it's also the stuffing, it's also the potatoes, it's also the cranberries, it's also the apple cider. It's everything that we are eating. The green bean casserole. It's all those helpings of stuffing. It's everything, putting us into a food coma. It's the entire feast. The entire feast. This is a picture of our Sabbath. It's what God does to us. Now, He doesn't put us in a coma when we come here, but this is what He's doing for us. When we come here and we feast on His Word and we feast on His table and we enjoy the praise and we enjoy the singing and we enjoy the fellowship, what He's providing for us is a full course meal in which He is giving us rest. Rest. God has provided everything for us. And we're to be content in that. In the midst of all the anxiety, in the midst of all the stuff going on around us, the fear, the chaos, the disappointments, the failures, whatever we got going on in our lives, including my own, I know that there is some place I can go every week and experience rest. And that's here, where Jesus is smiling at us. This is the grace-shaped life for us. Rest provided to sinners, unlovely sinners, sinners who don't deserve it. And yet that's His provision for us every time we gather. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Everything He has given to us, He provides for us. And that allows us to leave, when we leave here, as rested people. Let's pray.